Hi, welcome to the Bangladesh Feminist Oral History Project presented by the Bangladesh Feminist Archives. I'm your host, Nirnoy. This project brings together intergenerational Bangladeshi feminists whose work across classrooms, streets, movements, and everyday political practice continues to shape our pasts, presents, and futures. Today, I'm joined by Nirnoy H. Islam, an educator, organizer, researcher, and movement practitioner whose work sits at the intersections of ethics, pedagogy, queer and trans politics, feminist organizing, and community-based care. Nino is currently a lecturer at BRAC University, where he teaches courses on ethics, culture, truth, and narrative, and has been deeply involved in rethinking pedagogy during moments of political crisis. Alongside academic teaching, his work spans queer and trans movement building, feminist study circles, community-based art practices, trauma-informed pedagogy, and emergency solidarity work. Across classrooms, collectives, and movements, Ninoy's work consistently asks how care, ethics, and political responsibility are practiced not abstractly, but in moments of rupture, violence, and uncertainty. So, Ninoy, let's begin with your early formation. You come from a background in philosophy, physics, and South Asian politics. What first drew you toward questions of ethics, power, and social responsibility?
Thank you for having me on this and for inviting me to talk to the Bangladesh Feminist Archives. We've been trying to sit together for a while now, but yeah, we're finally here. So I'm happy to be here and speak to you. It's also been a while since I've seen you, and so I'm happy to be here. In my formative years, for me, academia wasn't really the thing that got me into politics or got me thinking about questions of ethics. When from a very young age, I have been seeing people engage with social movements or working around community building. So even when I was in school, I was sort of doing voluntary work. I'd gotten involved in voluntary work from 2008, 2007, around then. So, but back then it was more um, youth movements, doing little things that are sort of helping the community, things like that. But as I went on to study further, um, and I was sort of down, I ended up in a liberal arts school. So I went to study philosophy and I went to study physics and mathematics. Um, but there was this liberal arts requirement, and I ended up in a nature and God class. And then with that, it was one after another philosophy class. And that really got me thinking about um, what I wasn't seeing. And so when I was sort of thrown into these classes on feminist politics, feminist philosophy, critical race theory, and its philosophy, social contract theory, Marxism, and all, philosophy of social movements, those really, really. So I was organizing on campus, but also side by side, I was in the classroom seeing how the work I had done before, maybe it came from a good place of sentiment, but it was also a very middle class sentiment of, okay, let me do this good thing for my community. I'm a good person, blah, blah, blah. So from then on, really thinking about what work needs to be done, who is benefiting from the work, at the cost of who gets to tell the story about the work, etc. So that was where philosophy really opened up, or I really needed things pointed out to me, like, you are wrong over here. This is your privilege. You need to sit with this. This is where you're not asking the right questions. And a lot of um, activists on campus were also really, really patient with me and had these conversations with me. So it was conversations around, do oppressed people have free will? Can you actually imagine yourself out of torture? And things like these, which really pushed me to think about what kind of work I want to be doing. And so it was partly in the classrooms, but in the academic setting with activists. So, and then coming and doing work, organizing, and then really seeing that a lot of these questions are meaningless outside of the classroom. Or maybe when we are talking about theory, the theory is supposed to be helpful. So the theory does make sense. But there's just a lot of translation work that needs to constantly keep happening. Otherwise, we end up alienating the people that we're apparently working with. So drawing that balance took me some time. And as I graduated and got more involved with movement building, um, I realized that I really wanted to study South Asian politics more, or I should study with South Asian politics more because that was where my gap was. Um, but again, the thing that keeps on coming up that I wasn't very good at um, sticking to the structure and learning from the academic syllabus. So being in the classroom helped me understand that, okay, maybe the way I was seeing the study of the government or political science, it is a very, very conservative department. So um, that also helped me understand that, okay, no, I am flourishing in classrooms on queer theory. I am flourishing in classrooms where we're talking about queer movements, studies, etc. Um, but yeah, so trying to sort of push myself, I ended up in a lot of these classes. I ended up doing okay in a lot of these classes, but it did equip me to do, it gave me confidence to do a lot of the work that I kept on doing or am building towards right now. So yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Well, it's your feminist oral history. Whatever you said, that will be the answer, right? Thank you so much
Yeah.
for sharing with us, Nirnoy. And really, really glad to be sharing this space with you. And I'm so glad that you always been a inspirations, one of the inspirations to me about because I think I remember that when I was just getting started. I think you're the one of the people who were bringing conversation about queer theory into the spaces, and I was very fascinated by that. So thank you so much for doing that and still continuing to doing that. Thank you. So my next question is for you, is that how did your education and early organizing experiences shape the way you began to think about politics, not only just as theory but as something lived, felt, and negotiated in everyday life?
um so when how should I frame this? Did you repeat the question for me?
Absolutely, I would. I think you kind of answered a little bit about this in your previous question as well, but you can expand on that. So my question is that for you is that how did your education and early organizing experiences shape the way you began to think about politics, not only as theory, but as something lived, felt, and negotiated in everyday life?
Okay. So there were a few conversations. So for me, a lot of these come down to there's a lot happening. I can sort of see it in phases. So if we go back to before university phase, I was looking for a community. I was trying to make friends. I was trying to build community essentially. Um, and so it was about getting people engaged, trying to just make connections, etc. um, and then as I started looking at it a little bit more deeply, or I was basically I had these harder conversations with a lot of these folks, but also I was being faced with this reality of not being in the scene anymore. So, for example, I was organizing in Dhaka and then I went abroad for my studies. So, in Maine, in the USA, it's a very white college. Yes, it's a very privileged college, but international students are more or less invisible. Um, but I also found it took me a while to understand racism over there. A lot of people understand this a lot faster. I do have I am light, so lighter skinned. So I had access to multiple spaces, which a lot of my darker skinned classmates did not have. And so these were conversations that we had within the international community as well. Like, can you, where in Bangladesh, because of my privilege, because of my upbringing, or because of the kind of access I was getting, if I was trying hard enough to make friends, to try bridge gaps, or to try build community. Yes, there was adversity, but um, part of it could be chalked up to, okay, let's work harder, we'll get there. Let's try differently, we'll get there. But over there, that was just hitting a gap. And I was seeing like very, very specifically how people who had no experience in organizing, people who were having very basic ideas, were being celebrated for things that I had already done before. Or, but then the thing that I'm saying is not being heard, or it's not being celebrated, or other people are getting credit. So, like, those things that started really hitting me. And once I started really looking at things from a structural level, I think I started getting very angry. So once I started getting really angry, I was also very the anger was also coming from um, like a self betrayal, like a betrayal of other people to me, but a lot of feelings, just a lot of feelings of why am I doing this? Why are we putting up with this? And then also extending to, why did I feel like I need to come here to be good enough? Um, so all of those things, and slowly understanding that the people I was, and then organizing. So like I'm constantly organizing. There's that. And as I'm organizing, most of the people I'm organizing with are also just deeply unwell. So because we are all unwell, we're constantly caring for each other. Um, and I'm also not the sickest person in my friend circle. And by sick, I mean like people are suicidal. So people are harming themselves, and we're taking care of other people's wounds, etc., and things like that. Or we're like someone's emergency contact, and we're really far away from home. So there's also that. And it's there. Just a little bit about Maine. So Colby College is a dominantly athletic school. So we had this word called NARP, non-athletic regular people. So I was part of the NARP, and but it's winter most of the time over there. The summers are beautiful, but even in May there is snow. So going from a very sunny Dhaka to a very dark, cold Maine, which was also a white majority, it was a difficult experience, and I had underestimated how difficult it would be. So but there I'm organizing, I'm trying to organize, I'm trying to be a better organizer. There's a whole lot of biases that I'm trying to sort through. There's this mental health thing which I had been in denial about for a very long time. And then I'm sort of ending up in these classrooms where, I'm hearing a lot of things. Maybe I'm not catching a lot of it, I'm not understanding a lot of it, but there's sparks that sort of sit with me, and then I'm revisiting a lot of these texts even now, uh, what, more than 15, 13 years later, and it's still very, very powerful. So for me, it was those teachers that I had, or maybe particular conversations we were having in the classroom, or being given the space to be angry about certain things. um, so even in college, we tried organizing against imperialism, raising awareness, and then sort of that being seen as, you all are doing too much. But then going through that experience of, okay, people will be uncomfortable, it is okay to be angry. But from then on, it was just the anger kind of kept building. I tried to keep on being patient, but then um, there was also this sense of I think I had become very unwell, so I couldn't see other people's care either. So there was also a little bit of that where, okay, these are a few of the very political but very angry international students on campus, or very political, very angry leftists on campus. So there was also some of that happening. But trying to do so I there were also just a bunch of experiments that we were doing that helped, because um I guess there's something in seeing American white man's confidence that really peaks in a US college where so this is something I say as a joke, but my degree essentially gave me the practice of that. So that was what I was sitting with in the classroom. Um, and that was what I was struggling against in the classroom, which is not like, it basically means that I can bullshit decently well. So when that was happening, and towards the end of my final year, sometime around then, so like, to me, a lot of the change was happening through research, but organizing, I came to back to Bangladesh to do two projects. And really, there was a lot of imagination, a lot of dreams that we were going to do this community-based art project. We'll do theater of the oppressed, we'll do story circles, we'll do all of that. um, and then it took forever to get off the field. And I remember Tanvir had Cafe M at that time, and they offered the space, and I was like, okay, we'll try get this together, but we have to do so much. Um, and I remember there were cocktail bombs going off in front of our house back then. It was a really chaotic time. Um, but eventually we got to do, I think, three story circles before I left. So this was Moncho of when I ended up organizing this back in uh, 2013 or 2014. Um, and then they eventually ran with the project. The project kept on going, and but I had left. So the team that I had sort of we'd organized together, they kept on running it. Um, and then there was this struggle to like, can we politicize this a little bit more? We're doing a bunch of liberal things. Okay, this is very fluffy and cute. Lots of conversations, but can we push towards systemic analysis or something beyond just us talking about our feelings or sitting with it, which also is powerful in retrospect. So that also took time. That like, it doesn't have to be this or that. Um, so I think that was difficult with the team, that like I was very inconsiderate in many ways, that I was sort of very far away, very harsh, and doing very critical of the work that they were doing, which also made them feel underappreciated certain times. Um, and when I'm thinking back about my earlier organizing days, that is what I remember really, because the community I was organizing in, not necessarily in Bangladesh, but the community I was organizing with in the States, and even the organizing culture in the States, the people of color, the queer community, just the kind of blog posts I was following a lot of the blogs and seeing a lot of the conversations happen. Um, so that was there was a whole lot of spoken word artists coming to campus, and just the way people were articulating it, people were very critical. People were very critical, and that being critical was also important for the practice. So when I am being critical, it felt like, okay, this is work, this rage is justified. But there was also a lot of it took a while for me to understand that a lot of that rage was also me not willing to face myself. And it's like, okay, I am being marginalized, so my rage must be valid, but then I am bleeding on a whole bunch of people essentially who are my people or who are my friends, or they don't need to hold that anger from me. So there was a lot of figuring out that I needed to do, but um, I think because of those connections, I got to go to a few places which were. So I went to the Color of Violence conference where I got to see Angela Davis live, which was a really big deal for me. And, it was just the space of so many activists, activists of color, international activists, a whole bunch of people. Um, but so there were exciting things that were happening. I got to meet Alok Vaidmanan. They came to our campus, and right after like the group of students who organized bringing them to campus, we faced backlash. It was around that same a few days back that I think Trayvon Martin had been killed, and there were the Black Lives Matter protests had started exploding around the country, and we were also trying to do something on campus, and it was a very simple thing. We partook in it. There was a die-in, and then there were marches, but then there was hate speech in response to the marches, um, and the marches were very cute. It wasn't like Black Lives Matter, kill the whites, or we want Black liberation, solidarity for people of none of that stuff. It was like Black Lives Matter, Muslim Lives Matter, Trans Lives Matter. Like they said a bunch of lives matter, and they just marched around campus. And even teachers, I remember teachers were upset that, okay, why are they talking about this on campus? So that kind of conservativeness, just being surrounded by a lot of conservativeness, also set the bar very low for what good practice is. So anything that was challenging that was essentially good practice for me at that point. Um, the upside of organizing in those spaces was that there was a lot of space for creative expression. Like I was doing a lot of spoken word. It was bad spoken word or good spoken word, whatever, but we were doing a bunch of things. So any opportunity for public presence became an opportunity for disruption. um, and then eventually it went, there was this, what really I think these two movements that really helped frame the kind of politics I wanted to do was, we started, a group of us leftists on campus started talking about divesting from Sodexo. So Sodexo used to have a very big involvement with the prison industrial complex. And initially the conversation, like we started a conversation on holding the trustees accountable, which turned into a movement for holding Sodexo accountable and then divesting from Sodexo. But once we started the conversation on divesting from Sodexo amongst ourselves and doing the prep work, we eventually found out that most of the workers who we were close to, because a lot of a lot of the people who were holding space for us were the food workers. So like we would be chatting with them, hanging out in the halls and etc. So they didn't want Sodexo to go. And a lot of when we were speaking to a lot of the workers on campus, because again, these are the people who became community for us. These were our bosses. We were working on campus. So my first job was in the mail room. I used to put in people's letters and then carry the mail from one mail room to another. And so a lot of and these were also the folks who were very sweet to us, kind to us, who understood that this is a very alienating setup. So when we were also talking to them, there were mixed feelings about this divesting from Sodexo thing. And eventually we turned it into a campaign calling for better living wages for the workers. Um, and during that campaign, there was, I think that now looking back, it feels almost surreal, because we were sitting in board meetings with the president of the college, with the registrar of the college. I don't remember what the names the people in the administration are called, but they were sitting with us, and we were a bunch of um, we were a bunch of final year students. Some of them were the first year, third year, fourth year. So there was a mix of us, but we were having these debates with these folks who are running the university, and we're telling them, you need to show us where your budget comes from. You need to show make what do you call it? You need to show us why they're not getting paid more. We hosted a teach-in, and me and another comrade. So S was a very big part of my um, organizing life back then. So this conversation that you threw to me, I was the one who was more, okay, we need to think about this. We need to write this down. This needs to become theorized. But S was more, let's do this first. You're always arguing too much. And I used to argue a lot back then. It was just sometimes for the sake of arguing as well. But they were more like, no, think about the feeling and let's do the work first. This is too much talking. Let's do the work. And so the two of us, we hosted a teach-in where administration showed up. We had somebody from Maine People's Alliance show up as well, who had coached us a little bit on how to keep the space balanced, but also make administration feel uncomfortable. But we had a whole group of students show up. So it was a big auditorium, and we had some of the workers come and share their opinions and stuff. But again, there were little things that maybe we could have done a vote, or we could have done things like, as I'm telling you, I am remembering. So though, when going through those experiences, and now looking, and when we then coming back to Bangladesh, working with a think tank, and then seeing how things here work here, and really understanding that I needed to reground myself, because a lot of that criticality, when I came back with it, one, it was misplaced. Two, it was that was my experience. That was not everybody here's experience. And so um, I really needed time to understand that the spaces have different politics, the spaces have different understandings. And just by sitting and talking to people, it will take time for me to re embody whatever the politics is. And so I had to learn how to do politics in Bangladesh. Um, and I think there was a lot of me not wanting to face the voluntary work or acknowledge my past selves. There was this tendency of like running away, essentially. Um, so I would move on from a chapter and completely close that chapter. That's not my work anymore. And then, so even when I came back, I sort of tried to distance myself from my US experience. It's like everything I did back then was, this was in the empire, so this is done. So there were very, I was trying to build here, but I was also not acknowledging that work in many ways, which also ended up, I don't know, this is like self-alienation or whatever. But when I went, and then while I was organizing here, and then having these conversations, learning to learn again, I think the mental health stuff like really came to the forefront. Like I was not functioning as a person. Um, and those were conversations that I ended up having with my parents, with people around me. Um, and then going to SOAS for my master's, I just stopped functioning as a person. Like the so the murders that happened, like Zulha's and Tona's murders, the PTSD or whatever that everybody else was facing, because I wasn't as close to them, or even the way, like I felt like I did should not be responding with that kind of fear or whatever. It took me a while to understand how much that had affected me as well. And so when I went to study for my master's, I essentially stopped functioning as a political person completely. And that was the time when I needed to face that, okay, who am I if I am a person who does not do politics? And that um, that time really helped me decide, okay, what kind of person do I want to be? Okay, fine. I'm a person who cooks and hangs out in the kitchen, and sometimes friends come over, and maybe once a semester we do something for the Sundar ones or something. But that stopped being like a core of who I was, that I live for politics, I breathe politics, because I could not breathe politics anymore. And I think from then on, that distance really helped, because that failure to be a political being, to be a political person, really helped. I remember it was actually for this course that was out of department, because South Asian area studies did not have any queer classes. So I essentially went to the gender department, found there was a faculty teaching the queer studies of Asia, Africa, Middle East, so like that course, queer politics of blah blah blah. And I had asked her to let me take the course instead, and she was maxed out, but she still said, "All right, like we'll do a trial run." And I remember just being very excited in that class, but also seeing how all of these master students were having very preliminary conversations. So there were the community I found from that classroom. So like there were practitioners who were human rights organizers, who had done queer politics, um, who had been doing research. So in that classroom, there was this split um, between people who were sort of passively learning a bunch of things, but also people who had done this work and who were really frustrated by the way the class was going. So those folks became a new community for me and helped me learn a bunch of things. Um, but I remember that, so I used to be able to type very fast, and now I cannot anymore. um, and it was my final paper, and it was past the Um, so I remember that um, a, a bunch of things. All of these memories sort of become tangled together, because around this time, I'm also having conversations with my family about myself. They've also found out, etc. So I'll go to that story in a little bit, but I missed a deadline, and um, I'm struggling to eat, I'm struggling to cook, I'm struggling to maintain myself, but also this was a very important deadline. Essentially, I'll fail out of my master's if I don't meet it. Um, and that was the final extent of how much one could take an extension. And so I remember writing, like sitting and finally writing that email to the PhD student who was our tutor, and to my faculty, that I am suicidal. I have been struggling with this for a while. I went to the therapist. I took an appointment. I am unable. Uh, Please give me at least, like, I remember asking for another extension. And then so my my tutor was a badass, and Sabiha called me in and then asked me, like, so why did it take this long, you know better, blah blah blah. And I'm like, yeah, I know better. But also I thought that because I wasn't doing the things that you imagine suicidal people to be doing, to me it was just like, I'm still alive, so it's not like I'm actually going to go anywhere. So I didn't realize that I was being suicidal, or that I was having like the phase I was going through for years now was something that one should be worried about, because I, as I said before, that I was taking care of people who I had seen like earlier in college, like my friends who had been walking around with glass in their shoes and things like that. So like I wasn't doing that kind of self-harm. So the and then like I started seeing a counselor over there, and I think so in 2016 it was the first time that I admit to being suicidal. um, but then once I had uttered that, everything sort of made sense, that I had been suicidal for a very long time. A lot of things that I was seeing as uh, oh, I'm just dealing with a little bit of depression, or I'm dealing with some anxiety. um, Mind you, I was on depression and anxiety meds already by then. And then understanding that, okay, certain things are gender dysphoria, this is not supposed to feel like this. Um, or even just the rethinking about childhood and things like, what is child joy supposed to feel like, or why does it feel like it's constantly slipping away. So there were these struggles. And so when I'm coming back, so let me just go back to college for a little bit again. um, Similarly, in college, I was about to drop a semester and come back. It was 15 days towards the end before graduation. Um, I was again very fortunate. It feels almost magical when I think about it, because my faculty, Merrill Beam, showed up for 1 year. He was a visiting faculty. He was a very badass trans guy. And I used to identify as non-binary back then, and I was doing a lot of that kind of. I was organizing queer groups on campus, like trying to get people, not like big groups, like really small pockets. Um, so I remember him sitting me down, like we were having lunch, because that was also something that was you could ask your faculty out to lunch, and that was fine, which was not the culture at all in the UK, um, which is definitely not the culture here. So I remember sitting down with him and telling him that I had tried to have a conversation with my parents about my gender, about my sexuality, and how they didn't really get it, and how I'd stopped talking to them. How so my father was, for the lack of a better, very biased, and I think my mother had good days and bad days, so whatever. um and so he was sort of telling me that, like, why don't you build on the parts where you do connect with them, so when they, like, not about what they should feel politically or how they should behave towards you, but how they are behaving towards you right now. Even if, and I'm like, no, but they're doing this from like this liberal point of view, blah blah blah, and they're like, it's fine, take that, that's still a starting point. Be patient with them, they'll slowly figure it out because they love you or whatever. And I remember thinking that, so during that time, I was working on a queer ecology annotated bibliography research with Merrill, um, like an independent study. So I was doing a lot of this organizing work and sort of sitting down with him, and he was an actor. He had been organizing, so he's part of like the white lesbian radical movement from the 80s, 70s time. So there was just a lot of learning I could also do by sharing these stories. And I remember there was another conversation we had where, like, I think I had three papers left I needed to submit for a course that I was doing with him. And then I also had this annotated bibliography left, which was a final submission for the independent study. And I told him that, like, we have this protest coming up, this protest coming up. If I stop showing, I can't go to meetings, I can't do this. And he's like, you are here as a student. You're not here as an activist. Your first job is here as a student. Just trust your comrades, tell them that you cannot do this right now, just let it fall on them. Graduate, because otherwise, like I was having conversations with, like I had become so sick that we had thought that I was going to drop, take a semester off, come back home. And my parents were worried that if I came back without graduating, maybe I would not come back again to study. And also, this was a month before my graduation, so it's the last stretch. And so and that conversation with Meryl really, I was like, I'm going to be betraying them. Not going to be a good comrade. But we have to do all of this work. We started all of this work. I was like, all of this will happen, but you need to graduate because you came here as a student. That's your first responsibility. Um, so these were two very important interventions that helped me. Um, and there were others who were very patient, who had these conversations, who in retrospect were celebrating the work I was doing, which took, again, back then it was very difficult for me to understand that they were appreciating me. But also I was not comfortable being very visible either. So there was also that, where to me, drawing attention to myself seemed like, oh, I'm trying to take the spotlight. I am hogging attention. And so that critical, um, I think there was also just a lot of a lot of traumatized people hanging out together, but also just traumatizing each other. There was a lot of that as well. And that also bled into some of the comrades that I had here. So we would all be very critical with each other, to the point where it was sometimes, now in retrospect, we were out fixing ourselves out of shame, which is not how change happens. So that that is, I guess, that's sad. And that's also how I hope others don't go through that process. Like, okay, maybe sometimes if people are doing really bad things, shame is good, but not like shame about what you're listening to, how you're sitting, or things like that, because then we're just replicating the same problems that we're apparently fighting against. So there was that stuff. I So I think, another, or a few other things that helped. So like, there is this notion of, we should organize like this, and then when we start organizing, things turn out to completely different. Um, I think, in another experience of mine that really formed the early, uh, or did it form? I don't know. I think seeing how people responded to the feminist conference that we hosted from Center for Bangladesh Studies also had, like, when I'm thinking of my organizing in, my earlier organizing life, that is one of the core memories as well. Like, we wrote up this document, me and Safi, we wrote up this document of, what, 5 pages on all these kinds of radical feminist politics we wanted to talk about. But and then we went and sat with, I had met Rahibhai, and Rahibhai, sort of, the conversation was, if I gave you 10,000 taka to do a conference, what would you do it on? And I was like, all right, let's do this conference on feminism. And it wasn't for 10,000 taka that we fundraised, it was around 50. um, but there was also like a lot of these gaps where, um, I think we wanted to do too much, and then there was a lot of things that just needed to be stuffed in. But from that experience, I had gained insight about myself, about my shortcomings, but also that it's okay for me to demand more from my comrades. And I'd met some people who have stayed with me till now, which is also like a very I think it's a blessing, Karan. There was a very specific conversation, like, so that very angry queer person who's come back from college is also the very angry leftist who sort of showed up in Dhaka again. And so I was very strict as a moderator, as a facilitator. And I remember this conversation between the two people, Jayappa and Shumyappa, um, both who are people I love to till date. So I'm saying this from a place of love. But so when Saki Bhai came to the feminist conference that we hosted. Um, we had a whole bunch of very interesting things happening where we were trying to build these connections with leftists, with indigenous groups, with queer people, but also having these conversations publicly, um, talking about non-binary identities, but publicly. And so just being able to see that, like, yes, it was in a conference room, but it was still in the public. So I'm not saying that, and I know it's not like the first time that that was done, but for me that was a very important memory in and of itself. And so in the final panel, I remember, like, it's not even a panel, it's just like a bunch of people sitting around in a circle. um I think the session was supposed to be on necropolitics or neoliberalism, something. But we were all very tired, so we were just going to do a closing round of solidarity statements or like thoughts and feelings, reflections. And I think Shumyapa asked Japa about her genitals, and I got really mad. And Java had very kindly started explaining, like, if the first question was about being transgender, about transgender politics, and then because Java was saying something about women's movement failing trans women, and then Shumyap was coming at it from like she was very chronically very ill and had gone through the hospitalization process, but was also like working class activist, so like a leftist activist. So um, I think she had asked a very pointed question. Jap answered that, and then she asked another pointed question, which was invasive. And I remember being like, "No, you cannot." Like I scolded both of them, like, "Japa, you don't answer that," and Shrimapa, you cannot talk. You can't talk to her that way. And like now thinking back, I have not done that in a while. Like that person has not been there in a while, but also I think that's fine, because I've also learned to not let things escalate to that point. um, so just sitting with these people, like having these conversations, doing those more boring conversations, having these conversations before it ends up in a public space like that. Um, so over the last few years, understanding that, okay, I can tell a story about myself, my comrades can tell stories about themselves, but there is a gap between the story we share about ourselves and then the kind of work that we are doing or the kind of legacy we leave behind. Or for me, the recent in the last even three years or so, the I think the greatest realization I've had is, um, why was I uncomfortable taking charge? So, I mean, a lot of people are not familiar with my work. I don't talk about my work a lot. And even like very closed, very small groups know about my work. And I had also withdrawn myself from a lot of this activism during, I think, in the past few years. And then for a while, I was active again. And it's sort of like still not very, I don't think I spoke very publicly on queer politics at all, outside the classroom or in conferences, and that too not very much. So I needed to face this discomfort with facing myself, or like there was no will to live. I think once I started going through the process of affirming my own life, like it became easier to do what I wanted to do rather than acting out of principle to do things that I thought needed to be done. So by that I mean that, like, once I started taking my hormones, once I went through my surgery, once I actually started looking the way I envisioned myself, or just talking for so long, even like what it's been 1 hour or so, um, this had become uh, what do you say? I think I was telling you earlier that I struggle to talk about my own journey, and that I struggle to talk now. So like this I know that can talk about my journey, that I should talk about my journey, and it's fine because maybe people do want to hear about it. But I still have a hard time facing myself being seen. So that's something I've been working on. And like the last 3 years, I've gotten really comfortable being misunderstood as well. Like it's fine. Sometimes it's easier to be misunderstood. I think that does helps people sit with their own insecurities a lot more, and I don't have to do a lot of the explaining. And so I've started using that as a strategy as well. That it's okay. It's like I don't have to be understood by everybody. I don't have to be seen by everybody, but it's also okay for me to be seen. Um, and so as long as my core knows what I'm doing, and by my core I mean like the few people close to me, um, or even if they don't understand what I'm doing, if I understand what I'm doing, that's enough sometimes. And so becoming visible becomes important, and I think that's in that part, I actually want to celebrate you a little bit, because you have been visible and you have continued to be visible. Um, and even when, so like, I think I was part of the camp that sort of, after Zulhassan Tono's murders, well, I was sort of like, visibility is violence camp. And so for security, we need to sort of um, be low key, very strategic about how we're becoming visible, how we're entering public spaces, etc. And looking back, I think maybe for a while that made sense, but after a while, that really was coming from a place of trauma for the wider organizing community. And so seeing that as a trauma response rather than as strategy, um, I think a lot of people are also realizing that now. A lot of my peers are realizing that now. I think a lot of that has also been helpful. Um, what do you call it? It's been a while since I've spoken in English for so long, so it's, uh, um, the yeah. So there's also this different forms of organizing can exist. Different kinds of organizing serve different purposes. Just because one person is using a knife doesn't mean someone else can't use a pen, or someone else can't use a gun, or whatever. And they all have their different uses, and they all have their different criticisms as well, which is fine. What is necessary, what is effective now? I think how am I useful now is a question that I'm more interested in. And for a long time, as I'm going through all of these experiences, I used to tell myself that I had become good at, um, especially 2015 onwards, that I had become good at separating my personal feelings from my politics. So like, but I think increasingly I have become a little bit better at that. So I had gone through a lot of these phases where I was dealing with a lot of my friends having breakups, or friend breakups essentially, which was being framed as political breakups, um, which really were people not facing their feelings. So those things, I think it's fine. Even for myself, sometimes I realize that I don't like this person. I don't want to work with this person. It's not about their political shortcomings, and that's also okay. They might have excellent politics. They might be doing the work that I really love and honor. I can appreciate them from far away, which is also fine. Um, so people can also be people and have their affinity groups and try to organize with people who feel comfortable a certain way. We don't, but also, yes, we should be feeling uncomfortable and expanding, etc. So there is a place for national coalitions, there is a space for being comfortable and hanging out, but there's also a space for us growing as individuals and like doing the work, facing ourselves. Um, because really everybody is unwell, everybody is very, very unwell. And if we aren't, like, if I'm being disciplined, I'm telling myself I am taking care of myself because uh, I need to be well to do, enjoy the things in life. But also, if that motivation doesn't work, I need to tell myself I need to be there for my comrades. I need to take care of this person or this person. There are different things that motivate us or work at different times. So just being good to each other. So like right now, I think um in the past year, especially after July, I think the July uprising itself really pushed a lot of us, or well, let me just talk about it from my side. July uprising pushed me to have difficult conversations. Again, for me, it's like these conversations are more difficult. Does it say something about people pleasing tendencies? Maybe. Um, but like once I had a conversation with I like remember sitting my mother down and sort of telling her, uh, yeah, if they pick me up, toss my phone behind the bed, or I'll drop it somewhere here, and my sibling knows my passcode. Make sure everything is deleted. So like having that conversation was very hard because I did want to stay alive to give my mother a good life. Um, so that once I had that conversation, it was like something lifted. Um, because I didn't think I'd live to be 30. And once I lived to be 30, it was like, okay, I should live like I lived to be 30, right? So now I should really live my life. And then when the uprising was happening and I was scared, my knees are shaking, but I'm still going to protest. I am sweating. I am terrified, but I'm seeing my students. I'm over there. So like all of these things are happening. It's once we went through that, the kind of power that I saw from the young queer activists who there was this whole group that got politicized by the July uprising. And seeing that was powerful. Seeing that was a very humbling moment and like a learning moment. So right now for me, it's more like I feel like I'm learning from, or I'm relearning to catch the pulse of what the community needs or what the communities need or want, or if we are to be a community at all. And so for me, it was very important to see. I remember seeing a video of Zohan sort of running through JU. And I was terrified that night. Like I thought we were going to lose him, but we didn't, which is excellent. So but he was there, he was running, he was protesting with people who essentially bullied him for being queer. So um there's that as well. And then I remember this very small video of Sahara popping up, and like I didn't really know about her back then. And she was talking about liberal secularists and Islamists standing together to take down Hasina, which was it was a very powerful video. It was a very tiny video. Um, and then afterwards, when we started organizing after August 5th, um, I think there were a lot of things, a lot of conversations happening in multiple pockets. Um, there was a text that she wrote which was really powerful, which really helped open a lot of my own mental blocks. Um, and then there were all these experiments that uh, different political spaces are having, where they're trying to build solidarity, push for solidarity, talk about rights, talk about dignity. Um, and then everybody sort of understands queer rights needs to be in the conversation, but they don't really want to say it. The moment we're saying we want LGBT rights, it's like, oh no, no, that's too much. That's risky. And so it was very strange also being, it's like, what do you call it? I don't know if it's karma or it's like that previous ghost that is like, no, 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 this is bad politics. You shouldn't do this. Like that, facing that person, but from like other people. Um, so there were all these conversations that were coming up around like, okay, you all are privileged queers. That's why you want to have these conversations in public. This is not the time. Wait for elections. Things are unsafe right now. But to me, this time of the interim government was a very powerful and potent time, because it was a time of uncertainty, which I think, just as trans people, we have dealt with so much in our lives that we thrive in uncertainty. That so it was like, okay, yes, we can think from a space of scarcity and entertain this doomsday thinking, or we can imagine what's the maximum we can do, what is the most effective movement we can build, what is the most we can push, and what's the most positive outcome that can come out of this. And so trying to build towards that, like trying to, instead of trying to catch the pulse, trying to set what the pulse should be. um, and so there, I think, yeah, it's been a very strange 1.5, the recent years. And now the elections have happened and people are celebrating BNP. We've had the Stop Jamaat election. Um, I don't know. I hope that we keep on pushing, because it does not seem like a time to be very relaxed either.
Well,
Not
absolutely. It's crazy, and thank you so much for the shout out, and thank you so much for that detailed, I would say, your like journey, and like I felt really I was really diving into it, and like I was trying to like to there's so many like sub questions came to my mind I really wanted to ask you, but then again you're just weaving these stories together so well that like it's eventually it felt like a full circle moment. And thank you so much whatever you're doing right now. Okay, so we're going to go to the next question. Okay, great. So as a teacher, how have moments of political upheaval, protest, and repression reshaped how you think about classroom?
okay. Um, so I think, uh, when I joined ULab as a lecturer in 2018, 2017, 2018. Yeah. So before that, I had not formally taught. Um, I had been doing workshops, I'd been running small tutorials, I had worked as a teaching assistant in college. Um, I had hosted teach-ins for volunteers. So like I had that kind of teaching experience. Um, but not the formal, okay, I am a teacher in a classroom. Um, so again, I was coming into the classroom as having been saturated with a bunch of what I thought is the responsibility of a teacher, what I thought is the politics of a teacher, or the power a teacher holds in a space, and what they should not. Um, and what a good classroom could look like. And then also having debunked this idea of meritocracy, how do I make sense of myself as a teacher? What is my purpose in the classroom at all? So I think in my initial years as a teacher, I really struggled to make sense of the balance. Mind you, I also uh, the rumor that went around was like I think I heard some people like I met people later on and they'd said, "Oh, you weren't a lesbian." Like that's what I looked like. Um, so I was not out to my colleagues. My like one or two people knew, but like I wasn't going to the classroom and saying that I'm non-binary or I'm trans mask or whatever. Um, but I had short hair. I wore a Punjabi. Went to class like that. So I think there was a double fold difficulty where I was facing difficulties as a woman. I was facing difficulties as a weird woman. Um, but then also I wanted to be the relaxed teacher who sort of gives them space. So I remember this one time, I think during the road safety movement, I had allowed around what 6, 7 students leave early. Um, it was a history of Bangladeshi media course, and I told them that if they're going to the protest, I'll give them attendance. It's fine because you could also do that. So to me, that was like, okay, this is the least I can do. You can walk out. You walk out since you won't walk out unless I tell you. If you go to the protest, I will give you attendance. And later on, one of the students came back and told me that only 2 of those people went to the protest. The rest were hanging out in the cafeteria. So, and then I was like, what? They didn't go to the protest? No. And so there was this kind of like, this is obvious. This is so obvious. But I was also not from, like, I had been out of the loop of this education system for so long that I had forgotten, or like it wasn't the immediate. Like, of course, if you give them time out, they will take the time out and not be in class or in a protest. Like, who would want to go to a protest? So there, those things took some time. I really struggled with establishing authority in the classroom because to me it felt like, oh, I'm being dominating. I'm being a authoritarian dictator type character. But sometimes the rules are also necessary. And then it also becomes chaos. And students stop learning things or paying attention in the classroom, or it's just a mess. And they're basically, what do you call it, jumping on my head then. Not literally, but you know. So there were these difficulties towards the earlier time when I was teaching, but I was also a lot more again, also I was very, very sick. I was very suicidal. I was throwing up and then going to class. I was throwing up, then going back to my desk. I was napping at my desk. I am looking at these papers. I am struggling to speak in the classroom. And then these students also look like they're my age. And sometimes they don't maintain their boundaries. So it was also like a lot of these dynamics. And also not understanding um, how much politics is okay to bring into that space. So because even in my interview, I remember the VC at the time had sort of, oh, you're an activist. I'm like, no, no, sir, I research activists. Because politics, the moment you say the word p politics, it's like you are going to lose your job. Which is sort of a little bit different for maybe doctors, for professors who study activism or blah blah blah, because they're professors. I'm a lecturer. We're at the bottom rung. So there was a lot of this like tiptoeing which I used to do, where I would see that senior faculty would get upset if I said no, or they would do what they thought was giving me an opportunity. So there were these things where I would struggle. I would really struggle to like draw the boundary. But I think I spent a lot of time um, sitting and chatting with the students after class, sitting and chatting with the students between classes. Um, so I tried to know what was going on. Um, Again, sometimes a bit too much. I didn't need to know all that. I was not their counselor, but a lot of them had very abusive situations in their homes, a lot of things they didn't feel comfortable sharing with the counselor, which they would come and share with me, and then I would hear them out. And that's the least I could do. But that was also like a lot sometimes. Um, Towards, so there's, I think there's a specific, um, again, a regret. I don't know, regret. Maybe it's not a regret, but it wasn't, it was the tipping point for me. Um, So during when I had gotten into ULab, I had already had certain friends who were students. Um, I had certain comrades who were students, and so to me, they were both comrades and my students. But I also thought that I had gotten, like, I remember getting respect from my teachers as an adult, not as a child. So I also wanted to treat my students as adults and not as children. Um, so there was that negotiation was a little bit difficult because my fellow faculty would see their students as children, and they would sort of have this paternalistic approach towards them. Protests were also seen as bad, and so whenever there's a protest on campus, it's like, oh, these kids are doing this, okay, they're going to be called, someone will talk to them, and blah blah blah. So during COVID, there were all these protests happening about reducing the fees at ULab. Um, and I remember, because I was away from my colleagues who I was doing my classes, but also things are sort of falling apart at home. And um, if I'm not in front of the person, I'm not faking it well enough, right? So as I am in my bubble, I am in my space. I have also forgotten how, not forgotten, like I think I pushed my colleagues. I was a bit of a doormat. Like I really didn't cause trouble unless I needed to. I would sometimes like be like, no, this is the theory here doesn't make sense. But I remember sort of emailing all of them, and then like I think I said something in solidarity with the students. I sort of like started riling the teachers up. Um, they had I some senior faculty like sat me down and told me that I wasn't, like, I needed to get my shit together. Um, which I also understand. I did need to, because I was unwell and unable to teach. Um, but then at some point, when the movements were going on, I think ULAB called the police, or something happened, and the police were called and they arrested two of the students. And so these two students, one of them was a friend of mine, one of them was a comrade of, and they were also my student. Um, and so like I used to keep in touch with this person. It was also very it was very funny because it's not like so I'm not going to talk about the politics of the whatever the movement, or but the way it was framed as if the students weren't the ones coming up with ideas, but there were people outside of campus who were sort of giving them ideas and they were implementing it. So thinking that these students were not intelligent enough to come up with good or bad ideas by in and of themselves. So those things were very frustrating to see, but also ULAB had a very strong army presence. And it wasn't that it was people with power, it was also like a lot of the politics happens in these non-political spaces. It's like one-to-one relationships, or student clubs doing politics, or how do you generate consensus amongst 200 students? How do you turn one person into a villain in front of 400 students? So like those things, yeah, so those things were happening. Those things were things that I got to see firsthand at ULab. Like ULab had a lot of that politics back then. I don't know how it's now. So like I would be scared after signing a statement. I would be very scared after like going to see the students, or like, will they see me? Will they fire me? Because I was saving up for my transition at that time. And I really needed that job if I really wanted my transition. Um, and so when they arrested them, so they arrested Raihan and Sada. I remember going and sitting with three students and like asking them to go to the police office, like to the police station, sorry, to like call some of their teachers and go to the police station. And I remember like standing outside the police station, like nearby, but like not going in because I was a teacher. But after that, I have been to the police station multiple times for other people since then. And so whenever I'm going to a police station, I remember that night that I did not go in because I was scared, and I thought strategically it would be maybe it strategically it was a smart move, but whatever. Um, because I think maybe Sadat killed themselves a few years back, so Sadat is not with us anymore. Um, and for a while, um, some of us, like I tried to keep in touch with them, and we would play these games so that we didn't have to talk to each other about anything, but we would play word games to sort of know that okay, this person is alive. um, but then I also had a lot of guilt around this person not staying alive, and so I felt like I couldn't mourn them, but I would also get very triggered. So a lot um, when Sarah started doing the hunger strike, and she was sort of saying that she's going to die and all of these things are happening, that was also something that was really working at the back of my mind, that um like I remember sitting down and having these conversations with Sadat about trying to stay alive, or but then they're not here anymore. And so I was also really scared that like I thought maybe we would lose Sarah like the next day or something. So even when there was this whole thing among like people around Dhaka were sort of calling me up and telling me, "Do you know she's doing this strike? She's sitting there. She's doing this protest." And like, yeah, I know. Okay, she's doing it. I didn't tell her to go sit there. I was like, "Did you tell her not to sit there?" I'm like, "No, because a lot of you have told her not to sit there. She's going to sit there." So what I told her is I'm worried about her, and that I do not. So I told her that like I don't support this kind of action, or that she could have asked, uh, she could have talked to us about this. But I think it's whatever happened nicely. So when we managed to get her up from Raju, I think even till then I wasn't sure whether we would be able to get her up, whether she would move from there. So after that, after the fact, I realized that okay, um, this is there is a connection between these two incidents. Um, but yeah, there's another story that I guess like uh, a lot of the initial organizing things. So like their Center for Bangladesh Studies, there's ULab over there. So I would be doing a lot of back and forth. So I'm teaching there. I'm a research fellow at Center for CBS. So I'm coming to CBS and sort of hanging out, and there are all these radical students sort of coming and hanging out over there as well, and we can talk about movement and politics. Um, I remember like during the road safety movement, like being chased by Chhatru League, and I was scared. We were going to get beaten. But I was running with a group of little girls from college, so they're in grade. Some of them were in grade 10, some of them were in grade 9, some of them were in 11, and we ran into the office because it was nearby. But there were some people who stayed back on the road to like fight the goons who were attacking, and Sadat was one of them. And so when the July uprising was happening, I was scared. I was there, but to me, like, just I felt like showing up was important, even if I'm not uh, useful for the movement. Um, I cannot, like, would you say I am not good at hurting people. So there's that. But yeah, so now that the training from ULab was very, very productive, I think, because when I came to BRAC, um, I had the conversation initially. Like, I did not have my beard back then. I was in the process of getting my papers fixed. Um, and like, these were conversations that we had at the first interview when they called me in for the job. Like, why are your papers like this? What is the issue here? I'm like, this is what I will be working with for the next 2.5 years. I'm sorting out my life. um, I need to be addressed as Nirnoy Islam. And yes, my papers will match eventually. So they were good about these things. The department has been good about it. I think in general, um, male privilege is also a very strange thing. It is a lot easier talking about feminism if you look like this rather than what I used to look like. So now a lot of the, like, when we're talking about ethics and culture in class, like, I'm hearing the issues that my female colleagues are facing, or the kind of backlash and the kind of attitudes they're facing from the students for having these conversations about harassment or about feminism. And then I'm thinking back to the kinds of conversations I am having. Like, I am able to be a chill teacher with my students if I want to be. And it's not being seen as I do not have authority or I do not know, which previously was the case. Which could also be that now I have a little bit more experience about how to organize a classroom, but I do think a lot of it is also just the male privilege, um, which I'm seeing. But I think it's been helpful to be surrounded by, like, I'm also very lucky with the colleagues I have right now. Like, they do um, engage with a lot of the thinking that I am interested in doing. They are engaged in their own liberatory practices. So they are thinking through these theories. They are trying to engage with these things, like what is happening, um, and like the direction Bangladesh is taking. So it's been easier that I'm not hiding, essentially, like, oh, I'll be caught, and I'll lose my job. It's not like that. And it's more like, okay, I am an academic, I am an activist, and that's fine. I'll do my academia, I'll do my activism, and they can sometimes overlap, but mostly be separate, which is okay.
Thank you. I'm so in love with talking with you. It's just, like it's more likely I'm going to the past, the version I have seen you in the past, and the version I'm seeing right now. And I'm not saying like it's like a drastic change, but it's always been like, to as I have known you for a very, very long time, it's just like, you just go to the memory line, right? And also I have a nostalgia fetish, right? So I'm just trying to like to remember. No, no, I'm just trying to remember the days. I think the first time I fully interacted with you, I think in the workshop, I think so. That like they were like finalizing I think the next 5 or 6 years of like movement building and what are they going to do. And after that, the Julius thing happened, and then the Julius and Tonoi murder happened, and it didn't get that result out of it. But it's just such a, like whenever you're talking, even though like you're talking about July, even you're talking about your, the so-called radical self of yourself that like, you will be pushbacking everything and saying, oh, this is not good, right? But then again, I think that particular time you're the few people who were asking these questions, right? Because I know it's such a hot take to make, but unfortunately, our community is very political-less. We do not think through politics, right? And we are so passionate, but still, like it's such a nice community, and our work we do, there there's no politics in it, right? So I think you're the one of the person who kind of like, push the narrative about like, whatever you folks are doing, we need to like to have a political, conscience, right? So I think, yeah, it's been like, it has been like a really different situation right now. I know there's a lot of past people, not past people, there's a lot of people from the past. They're like not relevant anymore right now. We have a like a different type of like people like doing different type of like activism. And I do agree with you. I think it wasn't in your previous question. I think you talked about it, is that like how visibility can be a double-edged sword, right? Like I also felt that way. I think I become more reserved when I grew up more, right? Like I should be more like, becoming more fearless when I should be growing up. But then again, I think we all do have a Julhas and trauma. We all lived through that. And we all thought that like, yes, we went for pride, rainbow marches, we did this and that, publish magazines and everything, but what that cost us, right? We don't have a like a unified community people among us, so that like after that killing, nobody showed up for us, right? Nobody kind of like, put a placard. And now you folks are like going to Raju Bhaskar frequently and talking about LGBTQ rights so, casually, right? Like you, Muntasir, Sahara, like, like maybe our politics don't align with each other, but still the main concept of that is that like that's the beauty of like, having multiple versions of ourselves. And there's not versions, but political ideologies in a certain place, right? So I think the one thing I still miss, and I really so feel ashamed of saying that, like we have become so like, so intolerant of each other that like we cannot sit down in one table and have a conversation, right? Have a conversation that like, okay, fine, maybe your type of visibility, my type of visibility, your type of politics, my type of politics are different, but at the end of the day, what is the goal? To make sure like we are being acknowledged in the society, right? So thank you so much for saying all of those. Like I had a lot of like fragment I like, thoughts, like, like whenever you're saying this or that, I was like, oh, I want to like to say this or that. But I really do think like we are right now in a really interesting time, as being this queer community, because I never have seen that. I always have thought that like visibility costs, life. And that happened. That happened with Julha Jantone. We have seen that. But when I saw that, like, and also continuously witnessing things happening in Raju, it really also changed my perspective, how I see things right now in community as well, right? So yeah, I think as I have a working relationship or friendship with Muntasir, so I had a really really tough time having maintaining a friendship when he was like very out and out, and like, the whole NCP thing happened, and we had a lot of disagreements because as a mentor-mentee relationship, I'm mentoring him, that I also, he doesn't come from the Julhaj Tanoi trauma, incident situation I come from. So I think sometimes I kind of like, burden him with the whole trauma I am also going through, right? Because he never experienced that, right? I experienced that very closely, that like, and that's why my kind of trauma just reflects through a lot of like, as a head of the certain organization, I always feel that way. I kind of impose things to people, right? So I'm also reflecting, I'm also learning again, and also, unlearn my trauma as well. I don't know it works or not, unlearning trauma, but still, like I'm trying my very best to like to, like I used to like to very a little bit, rigid about like, we have experienced that. You don't have experience,
Mhm.
so you have to listen to us,
Yeah.
right? Right. But although there are some instances that we were right, we are right. There's a lot of incident happened which we shouldn't be talking about here, but I'm just trying to say there are a lot of things happened, and then people like me and you, we had to say this like I told you so. And it's not that like we love to say that like I told you so, is that like we don't want to say that, but still like sometimes you also need to understand each other, right? So I think right now has become such a a little bit polarizing in two sides, that like, oh, we are not going to listen to you, oh, you have to listen to me, or like anti visibility. So there's no middle point. I know middle point can be very tricky, and I'm not a middle person, but still we need to also find a solution that like how our differences can be stay together, and also our similarities can also stay together, and try to like to make sure that like um that like we are going for our ultimate goal. But what's the ultimate goal? We don't know.
Can I put in a little bit over here?
Absolutely.
So if I'm talking about it from a point of political optimism, like uh, I see the polarization as good. This is very good. This means that you have these different channels. It's okay. We don't have to sit at a table. Maybe the table really wasn't working. It was preserving certain people's interests. So if the table doesn't work, if there are multiple tables and there are multiple streams, so I guess what I'm trying to say is that um, even visibility, within visibility there are multiple types of visibility, right? Even within this movement of invisibility there are multiple ways of being visible. So as long as it's less of I guess this is a conversation that been trying to have with a bunch of different people over the last 1.5 years, is that even if you do not agree with the visibility politics that's happening, or like the demands for LGBT rights or whatever, this conversation is coming up. How can you use the movement in your favor so that you benefit from it? This thing exists. Make the best use of the moment, even if it is for getting your own grants. Like, okay, fine, even amongst the NGOs, like we've been talking about NGOization for a while now. Even amongst the NGOs, even within the CBOs, there are multiple different types of CBOs. There are some that are operating as fronts for the social movement, in that sense that they are doing a lot of underground activities, which is also very cool. A lot of them are what you call it in Namka Waste NGOs, which is also very cool. And then there are some that do operate as very structured, systemic, formal NGO type institutions, which is also fine. There is this very big political force which they will do their movements differently, but they will have to do their own movements. I think that's where, once that keeps on happening, um, those lines can also be articulated better. Okay, where are, for example, then we can have these conversations where, um, so for example, like we saw Running Up, I was running until recently. Uh, so what is the kind of change that she's talking about? What is the kind of change Muntasir is talking about? What is the kind of change Sahara is talking about? What is the kind of change, for example, I'm trying to talk about? Can there be different kinds of change, or are these, if these are not in conflict, which is also fine if they are in conflict. That's why we say feminisms, right? um, but how can we uh, build in a way that we get stronger? Like, okay, fine, we don't need to sit at a table, but like we know that we need to stay alive. So eventually, in the long term, systematically or as a system, how can we um, give each other strength, preserve each other? I think, and I
Thank
think
you. No, 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 yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, I do agree with you. Like, I think like sitting together is like a very utopian idea that like we have to like to sit together and like do. But then again, I feel somehow that like yes, we do not have to sit together, but at some point we really need to like listen to each other at some point. I'm just trying to say is that,
Yeah.
like
No,
sometimes it's
definitely.
so distant and it's so like, like I'm not going to see your face. I'm not going to see your face. But like, like, I
Yeah.
mean, you don't have to see your faces, but at least listen to each other and saying like, what's this about? Right. Then again, I feel like, I don't know, like I feel like
Mhm.
whenever we make this like, you versus me and you versus me,
Mhm.
I think it's more likely that like we are losing this game more likely, you know. So yeah, I mean I can
Yeah.
go on and on about this
Yeah.
rant,
I
but I'm going to go for the
agree.
next because I'm also building to the next question because that's really political question. So I'm just so you have worked across different kinds of collectives like youth platforms, feminist groups, queer and trans networks, and interdisciplinary spaces. So what tensions or contradictions have you encountered in movement building, and how do you navigate them?
Okay. What tensions have I encountered in movement building and how do I navigate them? Um, so I translation. I think for me, translation is the hardest thing. And when I say translation, I don't mean like English and Bangla. I mean just the self that goes to work, for example, is a particular type of Nirnoy. And once I'm putting on that hat, it's very difficult for me to take off that hat and sort of become a different person. When I am constantly, when I'm organizing a protest, if it's coming up in 2 days and I am in that process for the next 2 days, the kind of person who is the kind of hat I am wearing, for the lack of a better metaphor, will be a very different hat. So when those selves come in, so when I meet people in the wrong places, or so I meet my colleagues at a protest, I don't know how to behave with them. Or if I have friends who want to go to, for example, an event at BRAC University, um, that kind of um, the moment it becomes like four different people from four phases of my life, I am malfunctioning as a person. I don't know how to interface between them. So, in general, communication does not come very easily to me. So, like, speaking does not come very easily to me. So, I have to, like, I think I used to think very, very particularly about my words. Now I just become okay. I try, but I think now it's become more like a. I'm trying to get to that place where people understand the sentiment and sort of. I think this was also something that I had just sort of had to work through because of being chronically ill for a very long time, that like I wasn't able to speak, like was unable to speak. People had to sort of like guess how I'm feeling, or people had to sort of understand the vibe that I am sinking, I am not in a good place, or just read my body language. And because also have that skill that I can read people's body language, I also think it's fair to expect a certain kind of literacy beyond like explicit language. Like we do navigate these. We know if we're like greeting somebody like this, like oh Assalamu alaikum, like okay, I am sidelining the person, right? So these kinds of things. So what is seen as decorum in these different places are very different sometimes. So what's seen as appropriate in these spaces are very different sometimes. And so if I don't have um I think a lot of times people will think I'm withdrawn, like I don't share a lot about my life, but I also don't see uh like it goes back to the thing I was telling you earlier, where like I've gotten very comfortable being misunderstood. I'm like, okay, fine. You can think I'm quiet, you can think I'm a snob, you can think I'm not mixing. I could just be buffering, and that's what I'm doing. Sometimes people will think I'm angry, but I've really just zoned out completely. And so these things I've increasingly gotten comfortable with. And so I do think that the kind of behavior I do with people in my everyday life or in these spaces over and over again is what will build my credibility, or will build trust for each other, or they will see who I am for, or however much they need to see who I am for our relationships. So that's how I navigate that. Um, with certain people, and because I do, sometimes I can be very impulsive, I can be very irresponsible, I know that, but I do in general try to hold onto my commitments and be responsible. Um, when I am But I've also learned how to sort of be less responsible, that it's okay for me to like not be very on it with everything. Um, and how I should respond to people based on how they are also responding to me. So sometimes I will be very enthusiastic. Like this has happened in the past. Like I'll be very enthusiastic and very friendly, and people will sort of take that for granted. So I'm like, okay, tone it back. um, it's okay. It's okay to not respond like that with everybody. And so just becoming comfortable with that, that maybe it doesn't feel good at times, maybe it feels like, okay, maybe if they met me 3 4 years back, they would have met a different me, I would have been kinder, I would have been softer or whatever. But it's also like, um, just the kind of reality I'm navigating, and these intersections that I'm navigating right now. It's okay. There's also a lot more to protect right now. Like, so I don't have to explain everything to everybody, which is fine. They will understand what they will understand. And I can also see that when I'm offering an explanation, it's also being honored then. Um, like, okay, if I'm trying to explain something and the other person is trying to listen and trying to understand what I'm trying to say, rather than, okay, you didn't say this, you didn't say this, like, which was one of the bad habits I picked up from like this critical leftist queer politics from America, where it was a lot of, oh, you said this, you didn't say this is problematic, blah blah blah. So really moving away from that, like, okay, you can say the wrong words, but what are you trying to communicate? Like listening more than doing the saying. So um but yeah, there is also, it's also like I've become very comfortable. I've not become comfortable facing myself, but I do try to face myself. Like, yes, these are struggles I've had, but these are the privileges I've had, and these are the things that I do not want to be defined by, but these are the things that have brought me to where I am. And which means that these are the tools in my artillery box. So I will use them. Otherwise, I am letting these tools go to waste. Um, and so that's how I try to navigate these things. That if, instead of trying to keep academia and activism separate, how can I be pulling in resources from academia to support kind of the activism work that I'm doing? How can I take, um, groups that I'm organizing with and pull their experiences into the classroom? Maybe if it's not through literature or texts or materials these groups are providing, maybe even just the people from these spaces, and bringing them in to give talks or speak to the students or things like that. Or, um, one of the things that have, so like there is this, I think trying to grapple with who the who the student is and who I am as a teacher has also helped me understand. because now I don't teach a major course anymore. General education is sort of like, we're the liberal arts requirement. So the students do not have to come back to me, essentially. So if once I've taught them, I've told them that if you're happy with the grade, afterwards, if you want to find me, come find me. That's fine. Um, and so sometimes students do come back and find me, and they want to organize, they want to get involved, they want to learn more about certain things, or they'll keep me updated. Um, which is very different from the students back at ULab who were sort of seeing me hang out at the department all the time. So I was part of the core that was, they would see once the alumni would come back, etc. So that's kind of, that isn't there, but it's a little bit more flexible now. But it's been interesting because people have found me from like different spaces, people who are interested in doing research, who just like heard about me from somebody and then like sent their friend over to me. And these things have been interesting and fun. um, I mean, it must be difficult. There's also a limit to how much I can help. But it's also been a very humbling process because back before I entered teaching, when I was seeing, so like, uh, I remember organizing with a lot of Shiotiapa and Dinapa students. So I was essentially seeing a lot of my comrades, their friends, and their friends and friends, and really, oh, their students are like this. Their teachers didn't teach them well, or whatever, and like making judgments about the teacher based on the mistakes or silly things their students were saying. And so that has really been like a humbling process. Like, okay, they also have their agency. There is so much you can. Um, it's it's 3 months. How much can you actually interact with the student? But I've also just taken it in the pace of like, um, it comes back to the understanding people's pulse. Like, if I am constantly slipping out, forgetting where society is, my students are constantly reminding me where society is and where my conversation needs to be. Similarly, that's also what is happening in the organizing world. Like, I am constantly being reminded what the pulse is, where the pulse needs to be, constantly learning from all of these groups. So I think like each of them are, yeah, but I sometimes I wish I had 10 of me to do all these things so I would be a little less tired and I will hopefully get better systems in place.
Well, we need you and whatever you're doing right now, so many multiple projects. We're so proud of you and thank you so much for doing that, you know. Thank
Sure.
Thank you. This will be our last question. I know you have been like, feeling exhausted, like, oh my God, I'm talking too much. You're not talking too much. We're just, getting started with your own oral history feminist project, right? So my last question is for you, is that what keeps you grounded in this work? And in moments of exhaustion or uncertainty, what reminds you that like why this labor still matters? Yeah.
uh, um, what keeps me grounded? Sometimes, there, let me show you. This is a rock from a comrade from college, wrote me a message. Uh, when I got this, I remember thinking, so my comrade S gave me this rock. This sits on my desk with a bunch of other things in a tiny little pot. Um, there's another one. This is a unicorn. This was from my first roommate in college who I ran for. So we ran for student government together as a half joke, but we came out as first runners up, which was really funny. So this says "I'm powerful" at the back. Um, so she had given me this. I remember thinking, and this is also like a unicorn, so it's a joke because back then, like she was my straight best friend who I was in love with, um, and setting up with my other best friend. So so that's a little thing. This is a glow in the dark shark from another friend of mine. So these things sit on my desk. Sometimes like just holding on to them helps. Um, there is a tiny little pin over here that says "Be gay, do crimes." So that's kind of stuck to the wall. Um, this is something that I'd stuck on the wall as well. A student of mine had made this postcard to celebrate, like, so this is basically me in the picture during the Revolution. We don't know who took the picture, but it was turned into a meme, and like they wrote "raincoat Akhtaruzzamani Ilyas," and then this started getting circulated. I think somebody in Mirpur drew this on one of the pillars of the metro rail as well, which was very strange. So there's just little gifts which I see as little pieces, little hopes, little dreams of people, essentially. And if nothing else, it's uh, like I'll just, if I'm really really struggling now, like a few weeks back, I was going through like a low, like I had really burnt out, and I was like really thinking like what are we doing, what does all of this work mean, blah blah blah, because a lot of people around me have been falling sick, and like if my comrades are all falling sick, then who do I work with, what happens if these folks don't stay, what if the community we are building right now is not the community, like, a lot of what ifs. And for me it was that just looking for little moments of joy really helps. So I would sit with friends, I would see my friends, I would revisit work that we were doing, um, and like I am thinking about 10 years later what kind of world I want to live in. I have this very young friend who's he's 7 years old. So he's 7 years old and he's scared of growing up in Bangladesh. And he's told his mother. So he's from the Chak community, and uh, the Bengali kids are not so nice to him. But this child is also growing up around a whole bunch of feminists and a whole bunch of queer activists. So this child has also asked his mother, they're like, "Ma, what does genderqueer mean? Oh, like what does non-binary mean? Sorry." And his mother explained it to him, and she's telling me afterwards. So we're co-organizers at Diverse Feminists. Um, so she comes back and she tells me, like, "Do you know your bestie was asking me this?" And then I told him this, and he's like, "Oh, then maybe that means I must be non-binary." And then the mom was like, "You can be whatever you want to be." I was like, "Okay." Um, and then moving on, this was like a while back, they had this conversation. So like when that child comes and tells me that like they are scared, and they're so young, um, in like I want to build a world that's better for this child. I want to build a world that's also like, one, I want to live with dignity. I want to, so it's like grounded in very little things, like my mother cycles. um so I want, if Dhaka stops being a cyclable city, like I'm constantly worried that the cyclists might face problems, etc. um I know that my queer friends get harassed on the roads. It's getting worse. And then we're seeing that Bengali nationalism is at an all-time high, and so the bullying is also becoming very different, and it's also like very Islamofascist in many ways. So these things, just reminding myself of these moments, those really really help at that time. So maybe I'm not the fear does not gear me into movement, but the when I'm thinking about these people, it keeps me going. Like, what kind of world do I want for them? What kind of world do I want to live in? Um, or what kind of world would would be where we wouldn't need to do all of this work? So um, I guess those are kind of, and we're constantly dealing with, it's like one crisis after another. Somebody or the other is constantly getting evicted or is becoming homeless or is getting harassed. So we want these things to stop, right? Like, I want these things to stop. So sometimes it's also like, I've seen, it's something that I've recently started doing, is that like, um in the name of mutual aid, a lot of times we would be like, a lot of people will be asking for money or be asking for help. And there's also a limit to how many people I can help or how many people I can take responsibility for. So I've also started limiting. Okay, fine. I know this person. This person has been given a chance. Let me help someone else. Or I know this person is going to be irresponsible with money, or has been irresponsible with money, or has been given a large sum and has been irresponsible. I will not give them more money again. I will not crowdfund for them. So like things like this, like really taking accountability for my own actions as well, because and letting people know that like, okay, I am failing to keep you happy. I am unable to make you happy, you happy, you happy, and that's okay. um, because we are exhausted sometimes, we are uncertain, we are insecure, and we do need to rest, which is okay. And last year there was this. I think I've been very fortunate with, like, if we act. I've been seeing that when I'm acting from a place of courage, I'm also met with people who want to act from a place of courage. So I have been meeting, when I'm running like a rocket, like I'm also meeting people who are like that. So those people have also been a blessing, and it was actually like a joke. One of my senior friends said, so Nasir Nasir was saying that all work and no play makes Nirnoy a dull boy. And I've also taken that to heart, because last year we've been working a lot. A lot of us were working and working and working, and there was really no time to breathe. To the point where it's been building a lot of resentment as well, with people in our personal lives. So really taking time off becomes very important. And whatever I need to tell myself, like even if it's like, no, it'll you are doing this for the greater cause. If it feels like having fun is not fun, like sometimes it's difficult. Like it is difficult. Like I'll feel anxious for going and having fun, but it's like, no, you need to do this for yourself, and things will sort itself out. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Oh my God, like we have done it, right? So, Ninoy, thank you so much for your generosity, your attentiveness, and your commitment to building ethical, caring, and politically grounded spaces across classrooms, movements, and everyday life. Your work reminds us that feminist and queer politics are not only about demands and resistance, but about how we hold each other through crisis and possibility. To everyone watching, thank you so much for being with us. This is Bangladesh Feminist Oral History Project, a living archive of voices documenting feminist struggles, solidarities, and futures. Thank you again, Ninoy, and thank you all for joining us.
Thank you, Anna. It was a pleasure.
It's a pleasure. Thank you so much. Bye.